Okay, there's usually just a very short time lag of a few seconds.
Mhm.
I just kind of talk through. Okay, we are ready, Aaron. We are
Ready
on.
here.
We are on live. Let me see if I can't bring in a few. Let me start a chat line and see what
Okay.
happens here. There's a group chat. That way people can enter. Okay, now do you see my chat coming up there? Or you might want to go
I
on
do see a message, yes.
All right. Let me try one more time to bring you up a little bit louder. Let's see where I'm at. Okay. All right. I should be able to hear you better now. Can I have a test, please?
Absolutely. I can say anything you'd like. Don't ask me to sing because that'll be bad for everyone.
Okay, let me see something. Somebody's here. Okay, Brian Green responded yes.
Brian Green, the physicist?
I don't know. Just a person named Brian Green. So let me
Okay.
see what they
It would
got
just
going.
be-
In
it
fact,
would
I
be too
have
much
to
of a
try to rejoin the
It
Hangout.
would be too much of a coincidence if it worked.
The page some way. Rejoin this Hangout. Okay. This is crazy. Okay. Don't know why I am totally separated from the Hangout now, but I most certainly am. Hangouts on air. Okay, wait a second. I should have two windows here. There it is. Okay. Now I found my window. Now I'm back.
All right.
Okay. Well, anyway, I did some reading on this, and it seems to me what the Romans had was a kind of Mardi Gras at Christmas, and in Roman style. We're not even talking New Orleans style. We're talking sex in the streets.
Well, unfortunately, they didn't have jazz. That would have made it better.
But apparently they had it was a real wingding, and people did this every year at the Saturnalia, and supposedly it stayed kind of raucous and uncontrolled for centuries, really.
Yeah, it is probably important to say that Saturnalia and the date of Christmas are actually separated by a few days. And yeah, Saturnalia lasted what, 8 days? I forget exactly, but it ended around like the 22nd or 23rd of December. So,
Okay.
so there's some separation between Saturnalia and Christmas, but
Okay, I understood December 25th to be the last day of Saturnalia.
as I understand that's not accurate. That it
Okay.
usually ends like closer to uh, yeah, like I said, they say a few more days before that, but it still has a lot of elements related to Christmas. There's aspects of giving and kind of like return reversing of fortunes where the poor will be served by the rich, things like that. So a rip roaring good time of gift giving and such, but still, like I say, a few days separated from December 25th.
I see. Okay, well, now, speaking of gift giving, I had found some stuff that it was sort of people that were disrespected that were first compelled to give gifts at this time, or again do a service like you're talking about where you reverse roles or something?
Yeah, yeah. As I understand it, where it would be one of the few good days, it would be better to be at least a house slave. I have to imagine though, for a good function or fraction of the slaves, they're still having to you know get something done. But it seems like this is one of the few days or few holidays where everyone was able to relax a little bit. There really wasn't that much work you could do in the fields in December, after all.
I see. Yeah. Well, that kind of makes sense. Now, Saturnalia, is this related to some worship of Saturn?
Yeah, Saturn was actually an agricultural god in many aspects. One of the characteristic things you see Saturn holding is a scythe, which you use for cutting down grain. So he was a master of time. Greece called him Kronos, for example, and he had that sort of seasonal aspect to him. So the Saturnalia was basically about the collection of the harvest and then having a big party because we now got this giant pile of food to eat.
Ah, right. And Saturn moves slowly, but is a very powerful force in the idea of people.
How connected the holiday is to the planet, I really can't say. I would have to know a bit more of the history there. But for example, the Greek gods didn't actually associate god names with the planets until around the time of Plato.
Right.
Um, so how much they might have actually associated a particularly agricultural myth to the motions of a planet like Saturn, which is very slow. It doesn't seem to naturally jump to my mind since, if anything, I mean, it's based on agriculture, which is really ultimately based on a solar calendar, while Saturn is going to take decades to complete one orbit. And believe me, I am not going to wait 20 years to celebrate something.
Okay.
So I'm thinking initially they're disconnected, but I would have to look more into that to see if.
Well, I don't know about the planet. I mean, I'm talking about the god, and I'm kind of
Oh
talking
yeah,
about a god I don't know very much about. But obviously, we've got a reaping thing, a harvest type of festival, or what, a last harvest festival, something like that.
yeah, yeah. He has that agricultural aspect, and by being kind of like a master of time, usually he's depicted as an old man having some sort of timepiece on him. Like I say, like the Greek name for him was Chronos, the word for time, even.
That would explain his slow movements then, if he's an old man.
Oh yeah, yes, old man, and of course with the Greek myths of Chronos being mishandled, you could say, by Zeus.
Right. And Kronos, time destroys its own children, eats its own children, is the way the myth goes.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah. Greeks really love their child infanticide stories.
Okay, well, here's what I found out happened later is that as the church moved north into the pagan areas of Europe, then all of these people essentially had a winter solstice type festival that was kind of similar. You find Yule and these other things, and so the church found it a good way to synthesize Christianity with the pagan religions by simply Christianizing their holidays at that time. So my point is here is there's nothing biblical about Christmas. There's no date given when Jesus was born. It's simply not a Christian holy day. Uh,
Yeah, unless you include the Gospel of Kirk Cameron. Yeah, there's nothing in there about tinsel or Christmas trees or so many of the other things that we've attached to the holidays. I mean, there's not even necessarily anything about gift giving in the Bible other than the wise men giving gifts to baby Jesus, but it
right,
wasn't
that's
exactly
the
any
only
gift exchange.
celebration. That's the only celebration of Christmas that there is some undisclosed number of wise men bearing three gifts to the
Yeah.
baby Jesus.
Yeah, and gifts you probably wouldn't even want to, give to children usually anyways. I mean, myrrh is supposed to be for embalming dead bodies. That's uh not exactly what I consider a toy material. A dreidel's way better than that.
True. That's funny.
On the other hand,
Yeah.
the gold, you could have like gone out and gotten a good gift. So maybe gold was just like the original gift card for Sears or something like that.
That's funny. Um, and what am I going to say? What was I going to say? I lost my train of thought there for a minute. Okay, it's not a Christian holy day. Um, and in fact, it was eventually the Pilgrims made it illegal, or the Puritans up in the Northeast made Christmas illegal.
Yeah, to them it was both too Catholic and too pagan.
I can believe both of those points.
Yeah. So in general, I mean, the Puritans tried to celebrate nothing at all. Birthdays, wouldn't have churches with stained glass windows. Uh, I mean, it's almost an argument for Catholicism what they were doing. It's like, this is really what you want to do. This is how you want to celebrate things. I'm gonna at least be a Baptist right now.
Right. Yeah, and in fact, the Catholics did a lot of, like I say, syncretism. They seem to understand syncretism way better, whereas the Protestants, that's really not so much their culture. They're separatists, and they don't try to syncrete their affairs with the affairs of other people.
Right. Oh, by the way, on Facebook, it looks like DN is also trying to
Good.
enter in, but he's having issues.
Okay, let me do this. Why don't you go ahead and tell us a story of some kind, and I'll see if I can't get DN in the thing here.
Sure. So you had mentioned the Protestant reaction to Christmas, and one of the things that I've come up with my own research when it comes to reinterpreting the holidays has actually been some of the Jehovah Witness reinterpretations of things, in particular related to the story of the wise men and the star and things like that, where they think the star was actually an object not of God but of Satan. And you could see how they could extract that from the Bible because the thing talks about this star rising in the east, so it's like a morning star. And that was one of the names for Satan. In the Latin text, you have Satan being known as Lucifer, which is literally the term used for Venus at its morning rising. So it looks like to the Jehovah Witnesses, they're interpreting that this star is like either Satan or some object controlled by Satan and was originally being used to try to have the Magi find Jesus so that way they could tell Herod and get the kid killed. So that's an interesting kind of reinterpretation of the story by that particular group. And strangely enough, I've also found that the novelist Agatha Christie kind of had a similar thing in one of her own little short stories about the nativity scene where Satan is trying to convince Mary not to give birth to baby Jesus. But he tries showing Mary like, oh, here's what's going to happen to your son 30 years from now, and shows him on the cross, completely, torn to shreds and dying. And Mary's like, oh, I don't want that. But then apparently she's looking at this vision and it's like, I guess he has, a little half smile or something, or who knows what, somehow convinces her that he knows what he's doing. That's a bit confusing to me. So decides to still have the kid. Satan gets pissed off, shoots up, and shooting up and looking like this big bright light, and that's what helped the Magi find Jesus. So an interesting little twist, kind of contrived, but I don't know if this is, good or bad to normal Agatha Christie novels. I haven't read anything else by her, unfortunately.
Okay. Okay, hang on. Let me put Boswell in here. Let me see if I can't raise Boswell. I got to get back to the Hangout some way. Oh, wait a minute. Here it is. Should be right here. Okay. Oh, I'm all right. I'm back. Now let me try adding DN again.
Yes.
Because I do
More
have
the merrier.
Feed. Having a little trouble here with my Mexican keyboard.
That seems like an interesting way to make things complicated.
As a site typist, it thrills me no end to be. Okay, now this won't let me correct. All right, wait a minute.
I'm just glad my typing's improved. When I first started doing it, according to the machine, it said my words per minute was negative. If I kept typing, novels would just disappear.
That's funny. Okay, let me try iterating this differently. Oops. Okay, well that's all right. I'm not able to add DN, and I'm sorry about that. I just we'll have to deal with it next time. We'll have plenty of hangouts throughout the year. It's these are just informal things, so
yeah,
not like missing a great show with a great guest or something like that. And in fact, shows tend to go way better the better I'm prepared. In other words, if I'm hurried before the show, just forget it. It just goes terrible. You know what I mean? Because it just throws me off my game. And then I'm not able to moderate very well. And I'm finding out how important that is. Boy, if you've got something you can say, it's great, just to keep the show rolling. But if you draw a blank, boy, things just plod along.
Oh yes, I do understand that circumstance. It's been a bit of the history of my own life, you could say.
So now you wrote a book called The Star of Bethlehem?
Right, yeah. The Star of Bethlehem, and there's like 1,000 other books with that same title, but the subtitle is A Skeptical View.
Ah, okay.
So you can probably guess how I interpret the story.
Well, no, we're not here to guess. We were hoping you would share that with us.
All right, so you're a good skeptic. You want to keep investigating. Excellent. So in particular, my background, my training is in physics. That's what my PhD is in. I also have other degrees in astronomy. So I have that scientific background, and many like me with that sort of background have been attempting to look at the nativity story and say, I think we can explain that with astronomy. That star thing, maybe that's a planet or a comet, or if we, look at the records of what was in the sky at that time, and we try to correlate that with what the gospel says, maybe we can figure out, first off, that the story is true, what the object is, and then even potentially date the birth of Jesus with astronomical precision, which would be amazing if true.
Yeah.
And a lot of people, attribute this effort to go all the way back to the great astronomer Johannes Kepler, the person who gave us the laws of planetary motion and was a big advocate for the heliocentric model. It's not quite accurate how his involvement was. He did try to date the birth of Jesus. He tried using astrological theories to do that. But he still thought the star itself was this miraculous object floating around the lower atmosphere and pointing out a particular house in Judea, not just the planet Jupiter up in the sky or anything like that. That was a later innovation in the very early 19th century, when various Bible scholars were trying to explain literally every miracle as some sort of naturalistic thing. Somehow it was misunderstood or just misread.
Was this Protestant rationalism you were talking about?
Precisely, yeah. And if you've had Bob Price on here before, I think he's talked about that many a times.
Unfortunately, we haven't had Bob, but we will this year. Should have Bob.
Excellent, excellent.
It'll be a real epic event for us.
Yeah, because I know Bob has talked about it, and most people know about the rationalist efforts from the works of Albert Schweitzer and The Quest of the Historical Jesus, where he
right. And in fact, Schweitzer is good to read, in my opinion. But I don't want to go too far with that. But I'm just saying, yeah, he's a good source. I was going to say, what do we have coming up? We're supposed to do Raphael Lataster's interview in January. We haven't set a date. I need to get the book and that sort of thing. But we're going to interview Raph. And then coming up in March, we have Hector Avalos. And I
Good
have
choice.
also contacted Christ mythicist Frank Zindler, who is now endorsed by Nuskeptix, and we are going to have a show with Frank this year. So it's going to be a big year for the biblical studies people with us.
And I can say I've been reading Ralph's most recent book, and I would say, yeah, you do want to get a copy of it. It's worth reading, absolutely.
Yeah, and Richard Carrier edited that. And we'll be having Richard Carrier twice this year. Okay, so we're going to have Carrier twice. We're going to try to have Price once. Hector Avalos, his work is incredibly relevant to the skeptic community. He's the first Hispanic American to graduate Harvard's Bible College up there. And he co-wrote, or he wrote the complaint against intelligent design at Harvard Divinity School, I guess it is. And that became something of a model for the country. Okay, so he's made a little bit of history as it is. And I've even visited his hometown of Nogales, so it will be interesting. And I'm webcasting from Tijuana right now, so.
Wow.
I'm exploring Mexican culture is what I'm doing. I'm exploring Mexican culture, learning the language, and I'm trying to figure out why America has such a problem with still. It's like Mexicans are the immigrant of choice to point at and say, oh, look out, they're going to take everything you got. Okay, well, they did that with the Irish, the Italians, the Eastern Europeans. They did it with everybody.
Yes, it's quite the mess
and it's
there.
never really true. It's never really quite true. And America really doesn't grow that much. Didn't really grow that much from the people moving into it.
Yeah. There's always a new generation with a new argument of why we can't like this immigrant group.
Exactly, and it's the old thing is politicians always end up supporting big business. Big business is the one who's always kept the immigration flow going. So it's just a carrot and stick approach that the politicians have always found convenient. They create a fear situation and capitalize on that.
Though there is I guess you could also wonder how much of the dynamic of U.S.-Mexican relations in the 19th century affected things. After all, there was a major war with Mexico, and half of Mexico was lost to the U.S. in that. I have to wonder what dynamic that may have set up initially and how it leads to today. But my knowledge of that aspect of American history is quite poor.
Okay, well, I'm not going to stay on this because I'm sorry I've wandered us. I've dragged us off topic here. But just what's happening with Mexico,
just by saying Feliz Navidad.
Right. You have a dynamic of rich country, poor country with Mexico. Yeah. Okay, and with poor country, they've simply got few options, and so to a large degree, they placate the United States through whatever they've got going. They changed the government about 4 or 5 years ago, 6 years ago. And the change was, we're sick of the drug war. We can only support America so much. And they went ahead and legalized small quantities and did things like this because they simply don't have the resources to fight the drug war for America. It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
So anyway, back to the Romans. So Romans, we know that, Romans are a different sort of society than ours. If people are going to go and they're going to have sex publicly, that's not even batting an eye in Roman society. Okay, that's a typical occurrence.
I imagine the upper classes would look down on those in the streets. They're supposed, you should go into the brothel and take care of the business, privately and such. But yeah, there was it kind of goes back and forth. Like, as I understand, Caesar Augustus was actually quite a prude in many ways and religiously conservative, and was apparently rather restrictive on his own family, saying you also need to follow these more conservative lifestyles and sex choices and things like that. And one of his daughters, Julia, apparently did not do this, and that became a really big scandal, and she was actually banished to an island for much of the rest of her life.
Okay. That kind of rings a little bell with me. Now, in fact, what I understand, and I think one of the reasons Christianity succeeded, was that many Romans were trying to get a more ordered society, and one that was less licentious, and that was, simply put, more orthodox, and that they did in fact, they were inspired by the Hebrews as what they did, because the Hebrews were very good rule followers. They had very normative scriptures, and in pagan Rome, there's really no such thing as this. There's no one set of rules. Rather, there are multiple cults of every description.
Mm-hmm. And I haven't looked well into the arguments, but there's also been some plausible suggestions that like some of the works of Virgil, in particular, one of his kind of prophecies of like this golden child being born and bringing peace might be actually based on the virgin birth prophecy from Isaiah.
Huh.
So
Okay. Now we do know that Plato is looking at the Hebrew scriptures and commenting on them. And I think it's Plato that believes that the Jews actually have the correct story of how the earth came into being or something.
well, I don't think Plato ever referenced the Hebrew scriptures or the Jews, as far
Yes,
as
he
I
did.
know.
Yeah, I think he did, in fact, reference the Septuagint, didn't he? Now, I may be wrong. Okay, I'm happy to be corrected. That's not
Well,
a.
I think the Septuagint was the translation, the Greek translation of the Old Testament came about in the second century, if I'm remembering correctly.
BCE.
Yes.
Okay. All right. And he's back in the third century, is he? Is that what it is?
Yeah, Plato's like late 300s. Well, Socrates died in about, what was it, 399 BCE in Athens. Plato's writing not too long after that.
Oh.
Um,
Oh, okay. Oh, all right then. All right.
and it, and interestingly, as I remember, there's actually been some arguments that the works of Plato actually might have been influential on the Old Testament itself.
Oh,
Uh,
really?
yeah,
Okay, well, that may be, and I'm actually open to the idea of a late occurring, at least some of the books of the Old Testament, Book of Daniel, I think, that sort of stuff.
yeah. The Book of Daniel is definitely from written sometime in the second century. As for like the Pentateuch and such, even if it was like in its final composition, you could say in the second century, if it's that late, possibly it could still easily have older materials, but then it was just re-edited the nth time in Egypt, as some have suggested. I have no idea how plausible those theories are. I don't have the background knowledge for it, but it's an argument happening in Old Testament studies, as I understand it.
Right. Well, here's the thing that I've certainly run into is that you can never rule out diffusion.
Hmm.
People had been traveling the oceans, so ideas could have diffused pretty much from anywhere to anywhere.
Oh yes.
But showing diffusion, that's harder. I mean, you really kind of need to tie two figures to a document, as Carrier does, for instance, in his Christ myth theory, where he ties both Paul and Philo of Alexandria to the Logos idea.
Right. Unfortunately, we can at least reasonably estimate when those writers were living and writing. With the Old Testament, as I understand it, we don't really have good confirmation of that written document until rather late, unfortunately. There are inscriptions that might be quoting passages from Numbers, or it could just be that the Bible's incorporating these old stories into that. It's a wonderful mess with a really mishmash document that.
Okay, well,
Um,
what Carrier specifically shows is he shows Zechariah 6, the chapter
yes.
there where it's describing really Joshua. It's a Joshua story, but then, of course, some Kabbalist or something is reinterpreting this story in a mystical sense and basically reading the Jesus character into it as much as he can. And you've got this archangelic figure who then becomes the Son of God, this firstborn Son of God, the made in the image of God, and these other things. There are about half a dozen things that Philo and Paul agree on precisely.
Yes.
So that's what I find interesting. And if you're looking for a root of Christianity, that is there, and it's in the video that we did called I've retitled it "Modern Christ Myth," but it's the Christ Myth in the Modern World on YouTube. People can find it with that title because it somehow retained its original listing.
I hear it has a good host.
Well, no, I tell you what, I was up for that show. I was prepared. That was the whole difference. Was I came into it relaxed like I did with you today, and so we have a good conversation. If I'm just running in from being held up at Walmart and I'm in a coffee house and I'm firing up the computer, imagine that I'm hoping the Wi-Fi is not sluggish.
Yeah.
No, in fact, we had a show collapse that we had Shelley Siegel and another young lady were going to come do the show, and that one went down in flames. But that's all right. There's another season. We'll do makeups hopefully with those ladies, and Lobata Looning was the other lady. Hopefully we can do makeups with them.
I hope so too. I definitely know Shelley Siegel's work, and yeah,
yes,
her
music is very impressive, in my opinion. People I've shared it with have liked it as well. I think she's a very serious artist. Recording artist is hard work and nothing to sneeze at. So now Santa Claus, the Norse myths, the Anglo-Saxons, who contributed what? Okay, you could have really found a bunch of God stories that are similar to Santa Claus. The Irish had the Dagda, for instance. He's the good god, and he shows up with a sack, right? And in his sack is a cauldron, and which might serve everybody food, or it might end up full of gold. You don't know. So finding stories to go into that would have been really easy. And I guess there's some belief that the beard of Santa Claus actually comes from Odin, or something like that.
Yeah, at least the Scandinavian version of Saint Nicholas definitely has a lot of Odin characteristics. Though there are also plenty of crazy things said about Saint Nick himself, the bishop from what would be modern day Turkey, but living in the 4th century and was a participant in the Council of Nicaea.
Myra is the Myra. That's what Turkey was called at the time, was Myra.
Turkey was broken up in a whole bunch of parts, and I forget exactly which part of Turkey, or more broadly Anatolia, it was referred to.
Okay.
Yeah, lots of territories, lots of names, and nobody could keep them straight. It's weird.
Right. Okay. So what we're saying is he's a real 3rd century church figure.
Yes. Plenty of stories came up around him, including his gift giving from a sack where he apparently had unlimited supplies of food. Apparently he could fly around the Mediterranean as well, all on his own.
Is that right?
Yeah, there's apparently he's also one of the most popular saints, even before the Coca-Cola version, or at least the Victorian version of Santa Claus, as we've come to know him. Lots of places naming churches after him, claiming to have relics from him. He was like one of the most popular of the saints, and in part because he was supposed to be a guy who likes kids, and he has magical powers, and he fought heretics because he voted correctly at the Council of Nicaea.
Right, correctly enough not to get killed by the church.
Yeah, well, not only correctly enough to not get killed, but also to apparently dish out the punishment physically. Apparently, in the debates, apparently it did get physical at one point.
Oh, really?
As I understand it, yeah. Or that could also be later legend, because not every Christian martyr story has to be about the Christian being fed to the lions. Sometimes the saint can kick butt too. Especially if it's kicking the butt of a heretic, the worst of things. There were the stories between Peter and Simon Magus, and in the end of that, Simon Magus, the heretic in that case, compared to Peter, was the one who basically tried flying. Peter brought him down, and he basically crashed and died.
Okay, and then no conversation about Santa Claus is ever complete without the contributions of Thomas Nast and the Coca-Cola Corporation. Thomas Nast was an artist, an illustrator in the 19th century. And he was the first to put Santa, I think, in a red suit, though Santa could be known, Father Christmas rather, in England, could be known to wear numerous different colors and that sort of thing. But of course, he was still in red when the Coca-Cola guy makes him. And
Right,
that becomes iconic for people.
Yeah. As I understand, many aspects of the design had some predecessors, including Santa Claus putting on weight and things like that. But the Nast illustrations of Santa Claus are probably some of the most influential. Nast in general was actually a quite influential illustrator, since he, for example, created the symbol of the Republican elephant, the Democratic donkey, and our image of Uncle Sam.
I'll be darned. I didn't know he was the one who did Sam.
As at least in my memory, that's what I remember it as. And so, yeah, he already was quite influential with his drawing. He's, I mean, I guess he'd almost be like the Norman Rockwell of the late 19th century in America.
Sounds like it.
Yeah, and he originally, like I say, he had written there, like created the Republican elephant. He had tried depicting at that time President Grant as an elephant, kind of scaring away the rest of the party, because Grant was talking about running for a third term for president, which was unprecedented at the time. So that's apparently where he came up, started using that symbol, and now the Republican Party has taken it as its own. Democratic donkey was another cartoon. So yeah, a lot of illustrations by Nast becoming a big influence. But I've yet, of course, to see Democratic or Republican symbols on a Coke can. I definitely haven't seen that.
Yeah, Gold Coke. They're just not sectarian. Everybody's money is good at Coca-Cola. But and in fact, that's Warren Buffett. I mean, if and he's become his own version of Santa Claus in modern times. So was there any truth to that thing that Mark Zuckerberg's giving away all his money?
From what I remember, that apparently, yeah, he's supposed to be giving away a bunch of his shares in Facebook. So, I mean, ultimately, depending on what those shares do, if Facebook completely collapses tomorrow, they're worthless. But I can't remember what some of the details were. Some people were complaining about the particular way he was giving away his fortune, but as far as I can tell, it's still philanthropy. So how can I poo-poo that, other than maybe making it as effective as possible? I mean, some charities are better than others. I don't know the particulars of how he's going to give away his money.
Right. Well, it is strange that we see this even with skeptics like Bill Gates, a public atheist, who just doesn't, he's giving away his money because he's got too much of it, apparently. But you have to wonder what motivates these people, because they don't have to do this.
Well, in part, I know actually Bill Gates does care about things like income inequality. He thinks it's actually generally harmful, even in a broader economic sense. And in general, I think because Bill Gates has a sense of empathy, he's not a sociopath.
Okay.
When you're you're a billionaire and you have the ears of politicians, you have the cash, and you have the public ability to speak to everyone. Not to mention, of course, wanting to leave a good reputation as you
right
leave. Those things allow you and make you realize, yeah, there is something I can and should do with all this I have here.
Someone pointed out when people were kind of trolling rich people on social media, and they were saying something about limousine liberals. And someone came in and said, you know what? Those limousine liberals you're talking about, they've already proved it. They're the track record. They're still liberals and they're rich. Okay, what did you want? What more could a liberal ask for than a rich person who believes that they need to be liberal and to help support society?
Well, I guess they could if they wanted to follow the edicts of, say, like Peter Singer, who basically advocating that until world poverty is taken care of, you should basically give away all your fortune after you've like had a salary of like 40, $30,000. I forget the exact number he's supposed to be dealing with. So living very modestly and giving the rest to the needy because they need it, you don't.
Well, what I can see is, if you did get rich, you actually deserve to be rich. I mean, that's not a problem with me. I guess you'd call me something of a moderate, but but you should also retain your sense of charity. And if you can throw away 10% of your great wealth every year, not throw it away, but put it to other people's benefit, well, that seems like a reasonable thing to me. In other words, I wouldn't expect someone who had achieved wealth to live a simplistic or impoverished life for the sake of others. That would sound kind of weird.
It's also not going to happen.
Right. It doesn't usually happen. We don't need to worry about that. Okay. So anyway, Santa Claus is a myth, and it seems to me there are some striking. He's a Jesus figure to in a certain extent. Santa Claus is, or maybe I should say that Jesus is kind of like a Santa Claus figure. Okay, but he only comes once, and that's when you're beyond suing anybody for having lied to you or whatever.
Well, again, as I understand, in many ways, like Saint Nicholas was supposed to have like repeated some of the miracles of Jesus, but doing an even better job. So Jesus fed 5,000 people. Santa Claus, or I should say, Saint Nicholas fed even more people than that. So,
Right.
He has to even be better than Jesus. I guess he was John Lennon back then. I don't quite know.
Well, what's amazing is in a country like America, for instance, it's throwing away 40% of its food, roughly. Mm. Okay, now granted, most of that's done by industry, but still, it's being done. And then you have homeless programs. You have everyone jumping on the bandwagon. Well, hey, it's Christmas. It's time to go feed the homeless. I just find that as a ridiculous sort of thing. What you actually need is a reasonable policy to help homeless people all year, okay, instead of the one you've actually got, which is a willy-nilly approach by the churches to gain public recognition for charity, which is all it is.
Yeah, it definitely needs something systematic. It's not that you can somehow have someone who's less fortunate feed them up so much that they can hibernate until winter is over and then be fine. If somebody is homeless now, there's a good chance they're going to be homeless later, unfortunately, and that needs to be reconciled somehow with a better policy.
Right. And then veterans become popular. Again, hey, veterans, let's bring the veterans in and feed them. And it's funny.
Apparently we can feed them with guns. Apparently we can do that.
Yeah. And in fact, America has been crazy lately with the shootings. I suppose I'm just mentioning it and we'll kind of leave it at that. But you're probably going to see more sensible gun laws brought to America simply because people are tired of it, I think.
At least one subset is, but considering even a majority of Americans have said for a while, I think like 80-90% saying there should be like universal background checks and things like that, but it doesn't move Congress at all because of powerful lobbying groups. If that changes in the next year or two, I can hope, but considering that we've already allowed many children to be killed at like Sandy Hook and such, and decide that wasn't sufficient to have gun control, I don't know what's going to change things.
I'm thinking it's becoming something of an international embarrassment now.
Well, they just want our freedom, and that's why they're angry with us.
Okay, so, well, we're entering the last 15 minutes of the Santa Claus webcast, and it's certainly been thrilling. And I'm trying to think, what the heck is it about Christmas? Now, I would make the point, what I came across in my reading and in talking to others over the years, is that Christmas was originally, even, if you dial it back a few hundred years, people gave simple gifts. and it became very much a merchandise commercial enterprise in the 20th century. So that has changed the perception of Christmas and the practice of Christmas.
That's probably you mentioned in particular when that started happening, and that's pretty much at the same time as the growth and the creation, effectively, of the middle class in the Western world, where we have a large subset of the population that now has actual disposable income. They're not just subsistence farmers or the super rich. So that, of course, means that there's a lot of disposable income. Now that means, well, various companies want said income. So the advertising programs have been growing and growing and growing for, how many decades now? So this could be explained in many ways by just pure economics and just the pure demographic growth of a big subset of the population having significant disposable income. So you got the money, somebody wants you to buy gifts, and, well, advertising works. It must.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I guess so. It just seems to somehow cheapen the holiday, that it's now become more about what you can afford than about the simple sort of gift giving that people originally did. Someone might make a doll for someone. You see what I'm saying? They might have a couple pieces of fruit or nuts that would have been something of a treat at the time. And so it was more like buying a person a meal, not buying them a $2,000 gift. That's my point, is that it was a much smaller scale thing. And so it was much more for anybody and everybody. Again, if you're talking about reversal of roles, poor to rich, that sort of thing, it's that kind of spirit that everybody can get into when it's a simple holiday. But it seems to me in America, it's become very much about what you can spend on your kid. Little kids go out and show each other, hey, my parents really took care of me. And then the poor kids like standing there thinking, gee, I must not be loved or whatever.
Yeah. Well, that might be all the more reason we need to bring even more of Krampus into our holidays.
Krampus, that's right. He's this kind of trickster god figure.
Yeah, one might even call him the Anti-Claus.
The Anti-Claus.
Yeah, so as I understand it, basically, he's pretty much like the demonic form of Santa Claus that is there to punish the not so nice children. There's a similar thing in Iceland where there's the 13 lads and their mother. The lads all have their own little weird characteristics, and each one comes on a different night between like December 23rd and January 6th. And they all have weird things, like there's pot licker who comes into your house at night, licks a pot, and then runs. Another person is school licker, door sniffer, window peeper, things like that. And apparently on the last night, if your kids aren't repentant, the mother of the lads comes and takes away all the really bad children.
Oh.
And that's in Iceland. And considering Iceland is apparently a pretty peaceful place, maybe it's those sorts of legends that do it. So we bring Krampus to America, maybe we'll get things in order.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out Mexican things now, like the chupacabra, and then they've got what is that woman? She's Santa Muerte, Saint Death. They have Saint Death down here. You have to kind of look at it in a pre-Columbian fashion, that this is this is a synthesis. Remember, this is a Catholic synthesis down here. So you've got a pre-Catholic influence with Saint Death. she's literally death, but she's a saint, and certain people believe in her. There you go.
Well, of all the gods I want to have, on my side, I definitely want death to be, on the down low with me.
That's funny. Hey, I just want to point out you're a very knowledgeable guest, which made this, an actually interesting exchange here, because if it had just been me rambling about my odd recollections of what I've read about Christmas, it would not have been anywhere near as good as it's been.
Well, I'm glad I'm very good at pretending I know what I'm talking about.
Okay. Well, hey, you have to join us on a webcast in the future of some kind.
I'd love to, and of course, like I say, we barely touch the subject matter of my
They,
professional.
yes, that's what I was going to say. Let's talk physics. In fact,
Aha.
now I've interviewed one physicist. He has a book out. His name is Lewis Perry, and the book is called Atheist Friend or Foe, who I met in San Diego. And nice man. And I've not been able to locate him online. I just assumed that what I have to do is I have to write his publisher to contact him.
Interesting, because I think most publishers want all their authors to have a social media presence. I mean, heck, just from my own experience of trying to book publish with a rather small publisher from the UK, is that, and this is even true also for the big leagues, if you're working for Random House or that, basically they're trying to push all of the efforts of publicity and such pretty much onto the author.
Right. I can understand it.
Yeah, that's apparently the dynamic where, I mean, yeah, for really big authors and such, they're gonna pull out all the stops for advertising. If J.K. Rowling comes out with a new novel, everyone's gonna know about it.
Right.
I come out with another book, it's only because you saw me post about it on Facebook.
That's something. Yeah, I hate to talk to authors like yourself because I'm trying to write my first book. But no, I'm just joking, really. David Dworkin has talked about how tough the writing game is. And so, yeah, it's something I'm trying to write Magic Jesus. And it's just basically I'm trying to take a long view of history, and then I'm trying to take a microscopic view of modern history. But to keep the book short and keep it light and full of a lot of different interesting things. In other words, to try to put a lot of good information in a small place, about 200 pages, something like that. So, as you know, I need 600 plus pages, which I will try to edit down to get the couple hundred that you need.
Just take out all the definite and indefinite articles. That'll take out a lot of space.
Thank you. All right. Well, hey, did you want to just wind it down here, Aaron? It's we haven't made any major screw ups yet. Why don't we get off the air?
Well, I guess we could do that. I mean, then we can go back to our crazy, obviously completely structured lives.
Okay. Or if there was anything you want to cover, tell us about it. What are you working on?
Well, I just wanted to say that, like, we started talking about it, particularly my book researching all the different attempts at explaining the Star of Bethlehem story. That, interestingly, after that book had come out back in 2013, there was actually this really big conference about it in the Netherlands, a big academic conference that I was invited to. So while I was hoping what I wrote would be the last word on the subject, apparently we can't have that happen. There's still a lot of effort to try to see if we can somehow make science explain a religious story, and not in the same way that we can explain Christmas by axial tilt of the Earth. Axial tilt, the true reason for the season.
Yeah, that is true.
But in that respect, I'm trying to, still do some work there and looking at some of the various hypotheses coming out, and in particular trying to see if there's something kind of hidden behind the story itself, even if the author of the gospel is, writing complete fiction, which I think he is in this case, and I think I can prove it. The question is, of course, is he completely making it up from a fever dream, or is there something previous to that? Like, you're mentioning Richard Carrier and his work on the Christmas theory. One of his big arguments is that the author of the Gospel of Mark is basically taking the celestial Jesus, but then putting that story kind of into a more historical context.
Right.
I'm curious if something similar might have also happened with the Star of Bethlehem story, because there's a lot of places in the New Testament that says Jesus is literally a star.
Yes.
So okay, I have to wonder what's going on there.
Okay, well, I'm not going to say what I think because because it's going in my book.
That's how you push paper.
Okay, Aaron. Well, thanks a whole lot, and we'll get together on air again.
Sounds awesome. Have a good night, and if I don't see you before the end of the year, Merry Christmas.
Marvelous. Bye.